July 15th, 1984, Pike County, Alabama. The sun hadn't fully risen when Ruth Wallace turned onto the narrow gravel lane that led to St. Mary's Chapel. The morning air was thick with heat already pressing against her skin, and the kudzu along the fence line swayed lightly in the breeze. She was early, as always. Bible on the passenger seat. Biscuits wrapped in foil for the pastor. But something felt off. Her Buick jolted slightly as the tires bumped over a mound near the chapel sign. She pulled up, engine idling, and looked toward the ditch by the signboard. At first, it looked like a scarecrow. Pale legs, tangled in brush. A girl's body, face down. One sneaker still on. The other half off, barely clinging to her heel. Ruth didn't scream. She just sat very still. Her heart seemed to stop. And then, she turned off the engine. By 7:20 a.m., the first patrol car rolled up, its lights cutting the morning haze. Deputy Harold Gunn radioed it in as a possible DOA. By 8:05, the site was swarming. Uniforms, photographers, the coroner. Churchgoers stood at a distance, murmuring behind trembling fingers. The girl was Maggie Lynn Holloway, 17. Her name confirmed by the high school ID they found in her back pocket. The medical examiner would later say she'd been dead 6 to 8 hours. Cause: strangulation. There were no visible signs of a struggle. No obvious bruising, except for faint marks around the neck, subtle but telling. Her blouse was buttoned unevenly. A tear on one sleeve. Scratches lined the back of her calves, likely from running through brush or being dragged. But the detail that caught everyone's eye was the cheap plastic bracelet. Neon pink. A child's trinket, wrapped tightly around her left hand, as if she'd gripped it in her final moment. Sheriff Glenn Sanders stood just beyond the scene, arms folded, eyes narrowed. Who'd give her that? He muttered, mostly to himself. He watched as the techs took photos of her shoes, her hands, the surrounding area. The crime scene had been barely touched, save for the morning dew. No tire tracks, no cigarette butts, no broken branches nearby. It was almost too clean. Behind the chapel, Pastor Clayton Reeves stood stiff, one hand pressed to his chest, the other holding a handkerchief. "I came early to prep for the sermon," he said softly. "I saw her from the parking lot. Lord help us." But later, much later, Ruth Wallace would swear she got there first. That Clayton hadn't pulled up until after the deputy arrived. Still, no one pressed him. Not then. Not in that moment. By noon, Maggie's body was bagged and taken to the county morgue. Her mother, Betty Holloway, arrived just as the van pulled away. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just stared at the stained patch of dirt where her daughter had been. "I told her not to walk alone at night," Betty whispered hours later. "Told her this town ain't what it used to be." Back at the station, the preliminary report was thin. No known enemies. No sign of robbery. No sexual assault. Just Maggie gone. But a note was made. The pink bracelet didn't match anything she owned. According to her friends, it wasn't something Maggie would wear. And the real question began to settle in the minds of the investigators. If she didn't own the bracelet, why was it the last thing she held onto? As Maggie's body is found in this peaceful Alabama town, the sense of shock is felt by all who are part of this investigation. What's your take on small-town mysteries like this? Leave a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Let's see how far this story reaches. Saturday, July 14th, 1984. The last day anyone saw Maggie Lynn Holloway alive. In a town like Banks, Alabama, time doesn't move fast. It settles in the corners. The air hangs heavy with the scent of pine sap and fried catfish, and teenagers made their own fun in the glow of gas station lights and two-lane backroads. That evening, Maggie met up with her friends Leah Morris and Tina Franks at the Chicken Fix Drive-In just after 9 p.m. It was their usual spot, a tired little place off Highway 29 where kids hung out in rusted pickups and neon bugs swarmed the flickering lights. She seemed quiet, Leah would later say, her voice low, eyes searching memory, like her mind was somewhere else. The girls ordered fries, split a Coke, talked about a pool party the following week. Maggie picked at her food, laughed a little, said she wasn't sure if she'd go. Tina remembered how Maggie kept glancing at the payphone by the edge of the lot, but never used it. She was nervous, like waiting for something that didn't show up. At 10:05 p.m., Leah dropped her off near the trailer where Maggie's uncle, Walter Wills, lived, a half-mile down a dirt road off County 12. Walter told police he never saw her. No knock. No footsteps. Nothing, he swore. She never came up the drive. The time between 10:10 p.m. and dawn is where the story fractures. Somewhere in those vanishing hours, Maggie disappeared. A local farmer, J.T. McBride, later reported seeing a cream-colored sedan parked off the gravel lot near St. Mary's. Headlights off. Engine running. I figured it was kids messing around, he said. Didn't think twice. Another resident, Rosie Ballard, said she heard what sounded like a scream near the water tower just after midnight. Could have been a fox, she admitted. Or not. Deputies fanned out the next day, searching the woods and back roads between County 12 and the chapel. But the trail went cold before it ever started. There were no confirmed sightings. No known enemies. No indication that Maggie had plans to meet someone that night. But then came a strange detail. When investigators dusted the gravel near the church ditch, they found 2 sets of footprints. One set, consistent with Maggie's shoes. The second, larger. Male. Worn heel tread. And then they stopped. Just vanished. No drag marks. No blood. Just empty gravel. The working theory? She got into a car willingly. But why? At school, Maggie wasn't known for drama. She was quiet, kept her head down. Good grades. Played clarinet. Not the kind to sneak off or take risks. Her father had passed the year before, and she'd moved in with her uncle while her mother worked nights in Montgomery. She carried grief like it was folded in her back pocket, one teacher said. At home, her room hadn't been touched. The bed was still made. A stack of borrowed library books sat on her nightstand. On top, a dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. But something was missing. Her journal. Betty Holloway noticed it right away when she searched her daughter's things the day after the funeral. She wrote in it every night, Betty said. She never left it behind. It was never found. Not in her locker. Not in her bag. Not at the scene. Gone, like she was. Detectives interviewed over 24 people in the weeks that followed. Classmates. Teachers. Pastors. They collected rumors like puzzle pieces, but nothing fit. Some said Maggie had been talking to someone older. Maybe someone from church. Others insisted she was scared of something, but didn't say what. Leah recalled one strange comment Maggie made at the drive-in, just before she got out of the car. She said, "Some people wear God like a mask, but masks slip." That sentence would haunt Leah for decades. And years later, when it came time to reopen the case, that sentence would send a cold shiver through Agent Sarah McMillan as she read it in the transcript. If Maggie didn't trust the person she was meeting, why did she get in their car? And more importantly, why did she take her journal with her? Late summer, 1984. The cornfields behind St. Mary's grew high that year, tall enough to swallow a person whole. When the wind blew, the stalks moved like waves, whispering secrets only the land could keep. By then, the town had returned to routine. School started again. Football practice. Church bake sales. The world kept moving, except for the Holloways. Maggie's mother, Betty, stopped going to work at the diner. She kept her blinds closed. The sound of church bells made her flinch. She stopped living when Maggie stopped breathing, a neighbor said quietly. Sheriff Sanders gave weekly updates at first. "We're working every angle," he'd say to the small crowd gathered at the courthouse steps. But the tone changed as weeks turned to months. Fewer statements. Fewer questions. The case was turning cold. And yet, some folks refused to let it go. It started with a rumor. Someone had seen Pastor Clayton Reeves late that Saturday night, driving down County Road 12, headlights off. At first, no one believed it. Clayton was the man of God in Banks. The one who visited shut-ins, prayed over newborns, officiated every funeral. He was the town's moral compass. But the rumor spread anyway. Whispers in the barbershop. Side glances at the grocery store. Then came something stranger. A teenage boy, Eddie Palmer, 16, told his cousin that 2 days before Maggie's death, he saw her leaving the back door of the church rectory. She was crying. She said something about wanting to tell her mama, Eddie recalled years later. "I thought maybe it was about school or something. I didn't know." He told his mother back then. His mother told no one. "You don't bring the Lord's name into police business," she said. And just like that, another piece of the puzzle was buried. That fall, Pastor Reeves delivered a sermon titled "The Weight of Forgiveness." He spoke about guilt, about how even the innocent can feel burdened by what they've seen. He looked pale, thin. His voice trembled at the edges. In the pews, Betty Holloway sat in silence, her jaw set tight, her eyes unblinking. After service, as others shook his hand, she didn't move. When the crowd thinned, she stood. "Did you pray for her?" she asked. Reeves' eyes flickered. "Of course, Mrs. Holloway. Every day." Betty stepped closer. "Then you should know God, don't answer liars." The church fell quiet. A child's voice echoed in the back. "Mama, what's she mean?" No one said another word. Weeks later, the sheriff's department officially closed the investigation, citing lack of evidence and credible leads. The Holloway file was boxed up and shelved in Evidence Room C. Clayton's reputation, though bruised, recovered. He continued preaching, marrying, baptizing, and over time, suspicion dulled into silence. But in that silence, Maggie's story lingered. Farmhands said they sometimes heard humming near the cornfields at dusk, a girl's voice, faint and low. Teenagers dared each other to walk past the church after dark. They swore they could feel the air turn cold. Folklore took root where facts had died. And in the Holloway house, Betty kept a candle burning every night at her daughter's picture. Next to it, a small notebook, her own journal. Inside, she'd written the same name, year after year. Clayton Reeves. She had no proof, only instinct and grief. But she waited, because something in her heart told her that truth doesn't disappear. It just waits for the right hands to find it. Nearly 40 years later, when Agent Sarah McMillan opened that same box, she noticed something strange in the old evidence log. A note, written in faded pencil. Recovered fabric, white cloth, partial stain. Logged by C. Reeves. Reeves himself had cataloged the very evidence found near the body. Why would the man who found her handle the evidence that could have proven who killed her? Sarah leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the line. Outside the window, the Alabama wind rustled through the trees. The same sound it made through those cornfields in 1984. And for the first time, she felt the story wasn't finished. It had only been waiting. The Pike County Sheriff's Department sits at the edge of town, brick walls faded from years of Alabama sun, its hallways carrying the faint scent of coffee and dust. It was here, in April 2023, that Agent Sarah McMillan unlocked the door to Evidence Room C for the first time. Inside, the air was still. Rows of metal shelves stretched wall to wall, each stacked with boxes stamped by year and case number. 1984 was on the top shelf, a time capsule from a different world. She adjusted her gloves, squinted at the faded handwriting, and found it. Case 84-0715, Holloway, ML. The cardboard was soft with age. The tape yellowed. The label smudged. She lifted the box carefully onto a table beneath a single fluorescent light. The sound it made, a hollow scrape, echoed in the quiet. Inside were photographs, brittle police forms, cassette tapes of interviews, and a handful of bagged evidence. A torn sleeve fiber, a rusted zipper pull, and a small white envelope sealed in plastic. The tag read, Item 9, handkerchief, collected near victim's left hand. Logged by C. Reeves. Sarah paused. Reeves, she whispered. It was the same name she'd seen in the local archives, Pastor Clayton Reeves, the man who found Maggie's body. Why would a pastor be listed as the evidence handler? She took out the old Polaroids next. The chapel grounds looked smaller than she expected, wild grass creeping around the ditch where the body had been found. In one photo, a man's figure stood blurred in the background, coat draped over his arm, head turned slightly away. The caption beneath read, First on scene. She leaned closer. Even through decades of fading ink, the man's posture was careful, stiff, composed. There was something unnerving about it. Sarah called out to the records clerk, Tom Sanders, who had worked part-time at the department since the 90s. Tom, you remember this case? She asked. He wiped his glasses, chuckling softly. Everyone from Pike County remembers the Holloway girl. Pastor Reeves logged an evidence item. Why would that be? Tom's brow furrowed. Back then, the pastor was the town's golden boy. Sheriff trusted him. He came in that day offering to pray with the staff. Might have been when he handled it. Folks didn't think twice about chain of custody in those days. Wouldn't that contaminate the evidence? Sarah asked. He sighed. You're talking 1984, ma'am. Half our deputies were part-time farmers. Forensics wasn't what it is now. She nodded slowly, and no one questioned it. No one dared, Tom replied. Not him. By afternoon, Sarah had arranged for the handkerchief to be transported to the Texas State DNA Fusion Lab, one of the few facilities capable of extracting genetic material from degraded samples. Rush processing, she told the courier. Priority status. Then she sat back in her chair and read through the interview transcripts. The first one was with Ruth Wallace, the churchgoer who'd found the body. I parked my car around 7:15. Saw her lying near the ditch. Then the pastor drove up maybe 5 minutes later. 5 minutes. In Clayton's statement, however, he said he was the first to arrive at 7:10 a.m. The times didn't line up. Sarah circled the note and leaned back, staring at the old clock on the wall. Outside, thunder rolled, the kind that shakes the windows and rattles the air. She turned the page and kept reading. Another interview. A farmer. Then a student. Then, tucked near the bottom, a handwritten memo from the former sheriff. No sign of forced entry at rectory. Key missing from chapel storage. Sarah flipped to the next page. The key had never been found. By the end of the day, she had pinned photos, maps, and evidence notes on her corkboard. Red threads connected the church lot, the rectory, and Maggie's last known route home. At the center, Clayton Reeves, the respected pastor who claimed to discover the body, the man who cataloged evidence, the one whose name had been quietly written in a grieving mother's journal for nearly 40 years. Sarah turned off the desk lamp and stood by the board, her reflection ghosted in the window. In the dim hallway, the humming of the lights faded, leaving only the whisper of rain against glass. She didn't know it yet, but the white handkerchief, now en route to Texas, carried not just DNA, but the weight of a secret the whole town had chosen to forget. Who was Clayton Reeves before the collar and the sermons? And what did he bury beneath the name of faith? The handkerchief arrived at the Texas State DNA Fusion Lab on April 18, 2023, carefully sealed, its fibers frayed with age, its surface smudged by time and touch. What it held, no one knew. The team in Austin specialized in low-copy number DNA, traces left behind from a fleeting moment, a brush of skin, a breath. Lead technician Laura Chun, meticulous and soft-spoken, had seen plenty of cold case evidence come through. But this one felt different. 40 years in a cardboard box, she murmured, sliding the swab beneath the scope. And now it gets to speak. The cloth revealed 2 contributors. One female, expected. The other male, unidentified. Laura uploaded the YSDR data to the Texas State database, cross-referencing with Cody's and other local submissions. The process took 8 days. On June 9, 2023, at 10:14 a.m., the hit came back. Name, Clayton Eugene Reeves. DOB, January 2, 1950. Sample source, volunteer chaplaincy registration. Hurricane Harvey, 2017. Laura froze. She rechecked the profile. Then again, there was no mistake. Back in Alabama, Agent Sarah McMillan was sitting in the courthouse basement, reviewing a faded property list when the call came in. Sarah? It's Laura Chun. We got a match on your cold case. Sarah leaned forward. Go on. I think you'll want to sit down. That evening, Sarah sat alone in the war room, blinds drawn. The board in front of her, once scattered with questions, now had a single, jarring answer at its center. The DNA from the handkerchief belonged to Clayton Reeves, the same man who claimed to have found Maggie's body, the same man who logged the handkerchief into evidence, the same man who led funeral prayers for her family. She stared at his photo from 1984, crisp black suit, hands folded in front of the pulpit. He looked untouchable, trusted. She shifted her attention to the transcript from his original interview. I arrived around 7:10. Saw her lying there, face down. Her shoes were, one on, one half off. Her left hand was clenched. Nowhere in the public report had the position of Maggie's shoes been released. And yet, he described it exactly. There were other details, too. She looked peaceful, like she was sleeping. Her blouse, buttoned wrong, like she was rushed. That detail had been held back from all press. Sarah picked up the phone. She dialed a number she hadn't used in years, that of Deputy Chief Ed Rollins, retired, now living outside Tuscaloosa. He'd worked the original Holloway case as a junior investigator. "Ed, it's Sarah. You got a minute?" A pause. Then, "I've been waiting 40 years for someone to make this call." She told him about the DNA, the match, the contradictions. Rollins was quiet for a long time. "I always had a feeling," he finally said. But back then, no one was going to accuse him. Why not? Because he buried half the town's children, baptized the other half, and gave sermons that made grown men cry. He didn't just preach here. He was here. Sarah began drafting the affidavit. Every line of the original case file had to be reconciled. Every new piece of evidence had to be airtight. It wasn't just about an arrest. It was about exposing a lie that had been quietly accepted for nearly 4 decades. The image of Clayton Reeves, pastor, mentor, pillar of the community, was about to come undone. 2 days later, the final toxicology report from 1984 was reanalyzed. It showed traces of chloroform residue near the nose and mouth area on the blouse collar, a detail overlooked or misunderstood at the time. The old lab sheets listed it as unidentified cleaning agent. Now it had a name. Sarah sat with the case file open beside her, Maggie's photo paper-clipped to the front. She whispered, "You never got the last word, did you?" But the science had, and it spoke without hesitation. Outside her window, the courthouse bell rang, 6 p.m. sharp. Inside her head, a single question wouldn't leave her alone. If Clayton Reeves left his DNA at the scene, what else had he left behind? July 15th, 2023. It was early. The kind of early where the sky still held the night, and cicadas hadn't begun their song. Temple, Texas. A modest ranch-style house sat at the edge of a sleepy cul-de-sac. Roses bloomed beneath a spotless American flag. The porch light glowed faint against the dark. Inside, Clayton Reeves stirred his coffee, standing barefoot in a robe. The Bible on his table was open to the Psalms. His reading glasses rested beside it. He didn't see the vehicles approach, 2 unmarked cars, 1 state cruiser. The engines cut in unison. 6:12 a.m. 3 firm knocks echoed on the door. Clayton opened it. Standing there was a Texas Ranger, flanked by Agent Sarah McMillan and 2 Pike County deputies. "Mr. Reeves," the Ranger said, "we have a warrant for your arrest. You're being charged with the 1984 murder of Maggie Lynn Holloway." Clayton blinked. The steam from his mug drifted between them. Then, slowly, he set the cup down on the porch railing. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "Is this about Maggie?" Sarah didn't answer. She stepped forward, handcuffs ready. "You have the right to remain silent." He didn't resist. Clayton's arrest sent shockwaves through the community, but the story isn't over yet. Subscribe to our channel to stay with us until the very end. You won't believe what happens next. News of the arrest hit Banks, Alabama before the sun did. It was a Sunday, exactly 39 years to the day since Maggie's body was found. By 8 a.m., phones were buzzing across town. Radios interrupted morning hymns. A breaking alert scrolled across Channel 5's local broadcast. Retired pastor arrested in 1984 cold case murder of teen girl. People gathered in front of St. Mary's Chapel as if summoned by something older than memory. They didn't speak at first. Some stood with arms crossed. Others clutched coffee cups like they didn't know what to do with their hands. "He baptized my son," one woman whispered. "He married us," said another. "He buried my sister," a third added, eyes wet. The town was quiet, but beneath it, a shudder. Because everyone knew him. They didn't just trust Clayton Reeves. They leaned on him. He had delivered eulogies that softened grief. He had prayed beside hospital beds. He had held secrets. And now, he was the secret. Inside the sheriff's office, Betty Holloway sat in a small conference room, hands folded in her lap. She'd been called in before the arrest became public. When they told her, she didn't cry, didn't blink. She simply exhaled, a long, slow breath she had been holding for nearly 4 decades. "I knew," she said quietly. "I knew it was him." Sarah handed her the printed affidavit, the DNA report clipped on top. Betty didn't read it. She placed it face down. "I don't need the science," she said. I had her eyes. I knew. Later that day, Sarah sat across from Clayton in the temple holding facility. He looked older under the fluorescent light. skin loose at the neck, hands trembling slightly. "No lawyer yet?" she asked. He shook his head. "You were there that night," Sarah said. "We have the DNA, the handkerchief, your words from the interview, the timeline. You cataloged evidence at your own crime scene." He didn't flinch. "What happened to her?" she asked. Clayton stared at the floor. "She was troubled." "No," Sarah said. "She was 17. She was scared." A long silence passed. "Then, I prayed over her," Clayton murmured. It was the only thing he said. That night, as the story spread across regional networks, videos of Clayton's old sermons resurfaced online. One clip showed him in 1991, standing at the pulpit, voice shaking. "The Lord sees what man does in darkness, and one day it will be shouted from rooftops." People watched with a different lens now. Every word, every expression. They looked for cracks they hadn't noticed before. Sarah, back at her desk in Alabama, reviewed the property log again. One detail still nagged at her. The missing chapel storage key. It had never been found. Not in 1984. Not in 2023. But when they searched Clayton's house after the arrest, they recovered a box of memorabilia, old communion cloths, notes from past sermons, even cassette tapes. And at the bottom, a small brass key. Unlabeled. Worn smooth. She sent it for forensic analysis. Because if it was that key, then the story of what happened to Maggie wasn't just about a murder. It was about a door that had been locked, and who held the power to open it. The final truth, as Agent Sarah McMillan would piece together, didn't come all at once. It emerged in fragments, through DNA reports, interviews, and the quiet tremble of a brass key in an evidence bag. For nearly 40 years, the story of Maggie Lynn Holloway's death had been a question no one wanted answered. Now, the pieces fit, and they were hard to look at. Maggie had come to St. Mary's Chapel on the night of July 14, 1984, not by chance, not by force, but by decision. Witness testimony and recovered notes suggested that she'd become suspicious of Pastor Clayton Reeves weeks before. She had overheard something during youth study, something about a girl who had left the congregation suddenly, something about the pastor's late-night meetings. She confronted him, once quietly, then again with more force. And on that final night, after being dropped near her uncle's trailer, she didn't go home. She walked through the darkness to the chapel. The key to the back rectory door was never found, until it showed up in Clayton's house 4 decades later. The assumption now? He gave her access. Inside the rectory, the conversation turned heated. We can only speculate. But based on forensic evidence and positioning, what followed wasn't planned. Maggie threatened to tell someone. Her mother, a teacher, maybe the authorities. Clayton panicked. The fibers on her collar. The chloroform residue. The bruising on her neck. Faint, controlled. There was no violent struggle. No screaming match. It was quiet. Methodical. He strangled her. Not with rage, but with purpose. Then, he wiped her hands. Cleaned her skin. Redressed her. Her blouse was buttoned wrong. One sleeve torn slightly at the seam. Her shoes, one fully on, the other loose. A detail only Clayton described in his first statement. He carried her outside, laid her gently near the ditch beside the chapel sign, arranged her limbs. And then, he added one final detail. A pink plastic bracelet. Cheap. Juvenile. Something a child might wear. Sarah would later discover that the same bracelet had been used years earlier in Sunday school giveaways. Kept in the chapel supply closet. A symbol of innocence, placed intentionally. To blur the lines. To make Maggie seem smaller. Younger. Passive. It was a lie told in silence. During interrogation, Clayton never confessed. But when Sarah showed him the bracelet, his hands trembled. He looked at it the way a man looks at a ghost. She wasn't supposed to, he started, then stopped. He never finished the sentence. Betty Holloway was shown the report in full. She read it slowly, methodically, no tears. She was trying to protect someone, Betty said, even at the end. That was my girl. Sarah nodded. She did, she said. She gave us enough to find him. In a recovered letter found among Clayton's stored items, unsent, undated, there was a single page, handwritten. No address. No signature. Redemption is a selfish thing when it's forced. We pretend it's for others, but really, it's the mask we put on to face ourselves. I didn't kill her faith. I only buried the part that still believed in mine. Sarah read it 3 times, folded it, logged it, filed it away. In the town of Banks, the community split into quiet factions. Some said he was sick. Others called him evil. A few still defended him, unwilling to believe the man who baptized their children was capable of murder. But one thing became clear. For 39 years, Clayton Reeves preached about grace, forgiveness, and salvation. He begged the town to lay down their guilt, to cleanse their sins. But maybe all along, the one he was trying to absolve was himself. Sarah stood one final time at the place where Maggie had been found. The grass had grown back. The chapel had been repainted. Time had softened the edges of everything. But not the truth. That remained, unmoving, unblinking. She placed the pink bracelet, now sealed in a glass case, on a small stone marker near the ditch. It wasn't part of the official grave, but it was a symbol, a quiet reminder that innocence doesn't always vanish. Sometimes it just waits for someone to see it for what it was. If the town hadn't looked away, would Maggie have survived? February 8, 2022. Huntsville Correctional Medical Unit, Alabama. The cold gray walls of the medical unit swallowed every sound. The footsteps, the distant voices of inmates, the hum of fluorescent lights. It was fitting that Clayton Eugene Reeves would die here. After all, this was the final place he had evaded justice. Not in the comfort of his pulpit, not under the shield of his community, but here, in this sterile room, filled with the weight of time he could no longer outrun. Clayton had been in the prison medical unit for 2 months. His once powerful presence had withered under the strain of age, guilt, and the stroke that had been lingering for weeks before taking him. Alone in his cell, there was no one left to confide in, no prayers to give, no one to hear him ask for forgiveness. At 3:41 a.m., his heart gave out. The machines around him went silent, and the man who had once been the pillar of Banks, Alabama, was no more than another ghost, fading into the annals of forgotten history. His death was quiet, too quiet. And for Agent Sarah McMillan, who had worked tirelessly to uncover the truth, there was no satisfaction in the fact that Clayton's life had ended before he ever stood trial. The weight of his death, of an entire life spent hiding in plain sight, left her feeling as empty as the cold cell she now imagined him in. There would be no courtroom, no opportunity for the truth to unfold in public. There would be no final testimony, no confession. Clayton's last words, if there had been any, remained buried in the dark corners of his mind. And so, the case, though solved, felt unfinished. In Banks, the small town where the name Clayton Reeves had once been synonymous with trust, the arrest reverberated like the echo of a distant bell. But the news of his death didn't bring the peace people had expected. Instead, it stirred a quiet unease in the community. They hadn't wanted to believe it. Even now, they wanted to hold on to the illusion that the man they had loved and respected had been the victim of a miscarriage of justice, a misunderstanding. But there was no denying it anymore. For those who had lived with the unanswered questions for so long, Clayton's death wasn't a final chapter. It was a reminder of the passage of time, of how easy it was for darkness to linger in the corners of our lives. March 1st, 2022. Banks Memorial Cemetery, Pike County, Alabama. The day of Maggie's reburial arrived as the sun struggled to break through a gray sky. Clouds hung heavy over the small crowd that had gathered at Banks Memorial Cemetery. Among them were a handful of family, a few old friends of Maggie's, and a select group of townsfolk who had known her only through the murmurs of history. Betty Holloway, her mother, stood at the edge of the grave, hands clenched tightly around a tissue, eyes focused on the ground. She had lived in the shadow of her daughter's death for so long, but now, as the casket was lowered into the earth, it felt like all the years of waiting, of silence, were finally coming to an end. The new headstone stood tall against the overcast sky, carved with Maggie's name, the years of her birth and death, and an epitaph that spoke more than any words could. She told the truth, even when no one believed it. Betty remained still, her gaze fixed on the stone. She hadn't cried. She'd cried enough for a lifetime. Now, there was nothing left to shed but the quiet knowledge that justice, although delivered, was still a hollow victory. Behind her, Sarah McMillan stood at a distance, watching the scene unfold. It was a private moment for Betty, But it was one Sarah had waited for, the moment of closure for Maggie. For the first time in the entire investigation, Sarah felt the weight of the case lift just a little. But there was still more to be done, more to fix. The next morning, the Alabama State Senate passed a resolution, quickly dubbed Maggie's Law. It called for a statewide reform of cold case investigations, including DNA testing of old biological evidence. It was a hard-fought victory, the result of tireless work by Sarah and others who had never let Maggie's case fade into the past. Maggie's name now lived in state law, not just as a victim, but as a beacon of change. The state would now fund cold case reviews across Alabama, funding DNA testing for cases that had sat untouched for years. But even as the reform passed, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this law, this change, had come far too late for Maggie, for her family, for Banks. Back in Banks, at St. Mary's Chapel, things seemed to settle into the quiet rhythm they had known before. The community tried to carry on. The pews filled again on Sundays. The old church still stood as it always had, though something felt different now. For all the changes, there was still an empty seat, an unspoken truth hanging between the rows of believers. Sarah couldn't help but feel the sting of time. The investigation had taken so long, and the resolution had come only when it was nearly too late. Maggie was finally at rest, but what about all the other voices? The ones who had been lost in the silence, the ones who had never been heard? She looked out the window at the quiet town. The files on her desk still sat, unopened. There were other cases, other victims, other families waiting for the truth to be known. Her phone buzzed on the table. She didn't reach for it. Instead, her eyes lingered on the small box in the corner of her office, the one holding the pink bracelet. It wasn't over. Not yet. Some ghosts don't haunt us to scare us. They haunt us to remind us that truth never dies. Maggie's case is finally closed. But what do you think this case teaches us about justice? Leave your final thoughts in the comments. And if you want to see more stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button.